we already have pretty hard confirmation that the Nintendo Switch 2 is successful in all of the regions where it is available to pre-order. Japan, parts of Europe, America in the next couple of days. The Nintendo Switch 2 has a lot of momentum behind it, is clearly this really has this really bright future ahead of it, and right now all anybody can do is try and seed. I've seen all sorts of weird copes about this idea that the price could go up to like $800 because of the tariffs, while magically the PS5 and Xbox One also wouldn't go upward. I'm seeing people try and hype up PC gaming. I'm seeing people trying to attack Mario Kart's free roam mode. It looks boring. I'm seeing people try and say Donkey Kong Bonanza should have been a Wario game. I'm seeing people throw out all these weird attacks at games like Drag and Drive and the updates and Nintendo Switch Online. It's all just that myth that Nintendo Switch Online will just shut down and suddenly you won't have access to any of those games you pay for, even though it's a subscription service and you get more out of the subscription than just those games. Again, there's all these wild copes and narratives going around, and within the first week we've seen a good chunk of them getting dismissed and just written off. It's kind of crazy seeing people complain about the price while simultaneously acknowledging that PC and PlayStation are so much more expensive. And yet, they try and do this thing, well, Nintendo is a lesser brand, so they should be cheaper. Again, completely misrepresenting, the actual market conditions. PlayStation and PC are not relevant. Right, I myself am moving away from PC gaming entirely. After having already long moved away from PlayStation gaming, because these platforms don't have anything of value. Right, the idea that there's just unlimited options on PC is just a gigantic cope. It is a platform that never really took off. The only reason I think Steam was relevant for the past decade was because of the rise of digital distribution. But now that that's becoming standard for the consoles as well, Steam doesn't really have anything going for it. Steam offers the same exact product at an inflated price, and it's not really worth it spending time with or investing in. As anybody who watched me play Doom Eternal and Elden Ring last night could attest to, right? Both of those games were garbage. And now that we have confirmation that Elden Ring is coming to Switch 2, no longer can people act as if well, I only hate that game because it's not on Nintendo platforms, because that's not true. That never was true. Never will be true. FromSlop is complete trash, to the point where the second most disappointing game of the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct probably was Duskblood. Obviously, you can't possibly get worse than a game that isn't finished. But Duskbloods just looks like a complete train wreck. Even Souls fans aren't impressed with it. They don't like the Nintendo exclusivity and the online nature of it, right? FromSlop, the golden goose of the industry, the sacred cow, multiple Game of the Year awards, 10 out of 10 scores, the greatest company in gaming, won't even leave much of a dent in the relevancy of Nintendo Switch 2, right? The only reason this happened, I think, was to prevent people from acting as if Nintendo was missing out on this developer. The cope going into Nintendo Switch 2, the narrative, the long-standing narrative that Nintendo consoles can't run that, have been completely and utterly debunked, right? Looking at the Switch 2 and seeing everything it's running and everything that's getting released on it, all the upgraded ports, everything that's going on, Switch can't run that is is just a thing of the past. Right, Cyberpunk's on it, which I would say is the last truly next gen game we got, because everything else has just not been nearly that ambitious, right? It's all been like playing it safe, right? Like the fact that it can run like Cyberpunk 2077, a game that could not run on last gen platforms, may I remind you, is a testament to just how the Switch 2 is clearly able to run the most demanding of AAA games. And that was true for like the base Switch as well, but the more third-party support Nintendo gets, the more and more like third parties are going to struggle with like their age-old cope of pretending that their audience is on Nintendo platforms and that their the power isn't there, or that like that was always a lie. You know, even back in like the N64 days, that was true. But like they're going to have to face the music, because the reality of the situation is nobody is going to be supporting PlayStation or Xbox going forward, right? There's just isn't going to be any interest in these platforms. Everything that made them stick out or be relevant is now on Switch, right? We have voice chat, we have online play, we have like the more powerful hardware, right? Like, what exactly is the appeal of Xbox, PlayStation, or PC? Other than some superficial idea that they're more mature gaming platforms, right? These brands have been stagnant for ever, honestly. I would argue since the very beginning. You know, they never really capitalized on their strengths. They never really built up the developers. You know, to me, especially in the case of PlayStation, I feel like they just leached off of like talent and franchises that Nintendo established to begin with. You know, like there's a reason why we still talk about how Metal Gear and Final Fantasy became huge deals on Nintendo platforms, right? Like, there's a reason why PlayStation's reputation is inextricably linked to Nintendo platforms. The reality is PlayStation has always been a parasite on the gaming industry, just leeching away all this resources and talent away from like the far superior Nintendo platforms. And we're at the point now where it's becoming extremely obvious that Nintendo is a significantly more advanced developer than PlayStation. You know, last year we had to deal with complete and total plebs acting as if Astrobot was some like crazy revolutionary new idea that like it's a colorful 3D platformer. Look at all these references to iconic PlayStation franchises, which are, first of all, primarily third-party franchises that PlayStation does not own, but also essentially amounts to just, like, stupid hats and just dancing, okay? Like, look at this game. Look how amazing it is. Look at how it rips off all these elements from all these better Nintendo games, you know, 20-year-old ones in a lot of cases. You know, Astrobot is the game of the year. They spent so much time hyping that up as some major thing after years of downplaying like every single major Nintendo 3D platformer that came out, whether it was like Splatoon or Mario Odyssey or like anything else that's come out, right? They desperately downplayed everything and chose to prop up Astrobot. And what happens? Nintendo announces Donkey Kong Bonanza, you know, a revival of a classic IP that looks better than Astrobot, plays better than Astrobot, has more interesting, like, ties to, like, the deeper Donkey Kong lore that are really getting people fired up. Like, you know, the identity of that girl is definitely a major point of contention right now. Like, you know, clearly Donkey Kong Bonanza is going to like beat the pants out of Astrobot without even really trying, right? And people are noticing this. You know, game journos are not able to manipulate the public's opinion on these kind of things anymore. You know, they can bleed on all they want about how Astrobot is some like major gaming IP, you know, just like they did with Crash Bandicoot in the 90s. But in the reality, you know, kids are playing Donkey Kong, just like they did with Donkey Kong Country back in the 90s. You know, the industry can kind of try and gaslight you all they want into thinking Crash Bandicoot was some huge cultural thing, some huge phenomenon, but like the reality is the biggest 2D platformer, the biggest platforming series of the 90s was Donkey Kong. And that would have continued to be true well into the 2000s if it wasn't like for Rareware dropping the ball the way they did, right? So yeah, again, the fact that Donkey Kong has made a full-on return, not with just some like some lower effort spin-off game, but with like a true monumental, in development for 8 years, major AAA release on the launch window title for the Nintendo Switch 2. Like, this is a testament to Donkey Kong's longevity and relevancy as a brand and a franchise, right? The original Donkey Kong came out in 1981. 45 years, well, 44 years, 44 years since the original Donkey Kong. And they come out with this, this amazing looking title that just really blew me away. And we're supposed to believe that Astrobot can compete with this. Like, it just isn't going to happen. And this is just one example as to like the level of quality difference between Nintendo and PlayStation, right? There are dozens of examples you could name in pretty much every franchise, when it comes to every like hardware feature and like the price point and like, in pretty much every way, like Sony cannot possibly beat Nintendo. And so that's kind of why they're pivoting away to like PC gaming. They're going to try and like open their PC storefront, and they're going to try and compete with Steam because, Steam is like such a lesser company and is part of a much smaller community, and like, they might be able to like strong arm their way into relevancy there. But like when it comes to like actual hardware space, Sony failed, like all of Nintendo's competitors have failed, they tried to destroy Nintendo and they failed. And like it's only going to get worse from here. Like, again, one of the interesting things about this situation that I do think people need to bring up is that like there's going to be another Direct. Like we are going to learn more about Mario Kart World. We are going to learn more about Donkey Kong. We are going to learn more about like unannounced Switch 2 games. I think people are like really underestimating just how huge the Switch 2 launch is going to be. Like, and right now we're just seeing a lot of coping and seething, right? And even at this stage, it's kind of obvious that like it's falling flat. That like none of it is really going to amount to anything, that this is like a really just huge monumental like success story for Nintendo. But right now people are still in denial as to what's going to happen. We are in the middle of witnessing another major Nintendo success story.